the nerdy Halisimmer.
Hey you people, welcome to the second episode on flying on Vatsim and Helicopter ATC phraseology. Today we will learn how to file a flight plan. For completion's sake, I have to mention that Vatsim is not the only network out there for online flying with ATC coverage. You can also fly on IVAO, and there is a payware option which is called Pilot Edge. Global coverage seems to be a little bit better on Vatsim. However, you will hardly ever find an area where all airports are manned and towered or controlled as you would find it in the real world. And that's where Pilot Edge steps in. They offer you full coverage, even though the area of that coverage is somewhat limited. So let's take a look at the Vatsim flight plan mask. First thing you need to enter is your aircraft call sign. Now, if you're flying airliners, this might differ from what your aircraft's registration number is. However, in GA flying, so general aviation flying, you would usually use your aircraft's registration number. I usually choose a call sign that is typical of the area that I'm flying in. So if I'm flying in Germany, I would choose something that starts with Delta Hotel for helicopter. When flying the US, I usually use November 951 Whiskey Mike, which funnily enough is also the registration number of my car. Next thing to choose are the flight rules that you want to conduct your flight under. So VFR for visual flight rules or IFR for instrument flight rules. Choose your aircraft type, but keep in mind that the aircraft codes that are in common use do not necessarily have to match with the designation of the manufacturer. I believe there's a maximum of 4 letters that are being used, so an EC-135 would be an EC-35, an AS-350 would be an AS-50. Since both of these helicopter types are being produced under the Airbus name, today you would probably use something like H125 for the AS-50. The Bell Jet Ranger would be the B06 or B06. The wake category will most probably be light for any helicopter unless you are flying a really big bird, so anything below 7 tons is considered a light aircraft. The equipment code lets ATC know what your aircraft will be capable of in terms of navigation. I believe on Vatsim they still use the old FAA codes and not the more modern ICAO codes. Now this can get rather complicated and you will find lists for equipment codes on the internet. To make it simple for you, if you fly with a GPS system, you will put a G in that column. Let's say you fly a Bell 47 and you have nothing but a radio in your helicopter, so no VOR or DME or ILS receivers, you would put down a U in this column. Without GPS but equipped with VOR and DME as well as with a transponder that is able to report your altitude, so mode Charlie, you would choose an I. You might come across these terms: RNAV, area navigation. An RNAV-equipped aircraft is capable of flying any course within a network of navigational beacons or nav-8s, which basically means that you can choose any waypoint that you like and you do not have to fly to and from radio stations. Equipment requirements would be a VOR and DME, or an INS, which is short for Inertial Navigation System, or a GNSS capability, so you can make use of satellite navigation. You might also come across the RVSM, the Reduced Vertical Separation Minimum. This only concerns aircraft that fly higher than 29,000 feet, so it's not important for us helicopter pilots. Just know that within the RVSM airspace above 29,000 feet, ATC is able to reduce the vertical separation of aircraft to 1,000 feet as opposed to 2,000 feet below flight level 290. Since the FAA equipment codes already include information about the kind of transponder that is on board, we can ignore the transponder column. Now we need to enter our departure airport, our destination airport, and an alternate airport that we can divert to should something go wrong on approach to our destination. This is also important for fuel planning. You need to take enough fuel on board so that you can safely fly to your destination and from there to your alternate airport, as well as a reserve. In VFR helicopter flight, that reserve must enable you to remain airborne for a minimum of 20 minutes. Now, as helicopter pilots, more often than not, we take off from helipads that do not have an ICAO code or are not on the Vatsim system anyway. In that case, you would put a quadruple Z into the destination, departure or alternate field, then put the name of your heliport or helipad in the remarks section. The off-block time is the time that airliners would start their pushback from the departure gate and start their taxi procedure. For us as helicopter pilots, that would roughly be the time that we start our air taxi or hover taxi to the runway, or if we depart straight from the ramp, our takeoff time. Keep in mind that you have to enter UTC time, so Greenwich Mean Time. In real life, airports run a tight schedule on departure slots, so if you're an airliner and you miss your time slot, that could cause quite a costly delay. However, if you fly a helicopter or GA aircraft, or even airliners on the Vatsim network, it doesn't really matter if you are a little late or a little early on your off-block. Next, we enter our planned cruise altitude, as well as our speed. Now, when I fly VFR, I usually choose the highest altitude that I intend to fly depending on terrain and the surrounding airspace. If you fly under visual flight rules, ATC will usually not give you specific altitudes to fly. The reason being that you as a pilot are responsible to stay within visual meteorological conditions at all times, and ATC cannot do that for you. So let's imagine ATC requires you to fly at 2,500 feet, but suddenly there's a huge cloud in your way. Of course, you cannot fly into that cloud because you are under visual flight rules. So to make it short, you might have to deviate from altitudes or courses just to keep your flight safe. So ATC will rarely give you any specific altitudes to fly. They might give you an altitude restriction though. They might say not above 3,000 or at or below 1,500. So which altitude to choose? That depends on the terrain. You need to keep a minimum altitude, and you must also not fly through any restricted or controlled airspace without clearance. Now, as a general rule, when you fly a course from 360 to 179 degrees, you would choose an odd flight level, so 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000 and so on. However, in VFR flying, we add another 500 feet to that to keep us well separated from IFR traffic. So for a general heading on the northeast or the southeast quadrant of the compass rose, we would use an odd flight level plus 500. If we fly a heading from 180 degrees to 359 degrees, we would choose an even flight level plus 500. So 4,500, 6,500 and so on. Now this is a general rule for deciding at what altitude you want to fly at. And this rule is only applicable once you fly above 3,000 feet AGL. As VFR pilots, we need to maintain visual separation to other aircraft at all times. In the speed column, you would enter the expected cruise speed. This of course depends on your helicopter, how heavy it is, what the average cruise speed at maximum continuous power is. And since you're supposed to enter the true airspeed, so not the indicated one, you should also factor in any winds that might influence your speed. Then we need our en route time, so how long will it approximately take us to get from our departure airport to our destination airport, as well as the fuel endurance, how long can we stay up in the air for. The amount of fuel you'll need depends on several things. The hourly fuel consumption of your aircraft at different speeds and weight settings. Of course, the distance to the airport and the altitude that you have to climb to and fly at. If you have to taxi, the amount of taxiing needed to get to and from runways. The approach and departure procedures that you expect to fly. Additionally, the distance from your destination airport to your alternate airport. And finally, a fuel reserve should something unexpected happen. Once we've finished our flight plan, I'm going to give an example of a rough fuel calculation. However, if you don't want to bother with this, you could also just make sure that you have enough fuel for the time that you plan to fly. For instance, I rarely fly longer than 1 hour at a time, so if I make sure that I have fuel for 1.5 or even 2 hours, I'm safe. But if you want to keep it as realistic as possible and also want to play around with different cargo situations, you might have to trade in fuel for additional cargo. So that's where the flight planning becomes interesting. I may do an extra video on calculating weights and balances as well as aircraft performance, but for now let's move on. Now there are quite a few columns down the list that you can make use of, however they are not necessary. But we will look at the route details section as well as the remarks section. As the name suggests, the remarks section is for any remarks that you might have to your ATC controller, any information that you want to let him know before your flight. The voice rules are defaulted to voice, so that you would use your voice via a microphone to transmit to ATC. That's the way that you would do it in a real aircraft, and I recommend it. However, you could also use text, so you would be texting the controllers. So how do we go about planning the flight? Of course, you can use pencil and paper and plot courses on real-world VFR charts. However, in most cases, you would need to pay for those charts, and if you don't want to do that, there are a few alternatives that you can find online. One of those options is openflightmaps.org, the other being, of course, Skyvector.com. Now, if you want to fly the US, you are lucky. The VFR sectional charts for the United States are available for free at the website of the FAA, and you will also find them within Skyvector.com. For other countries or areas for which you would have to purchase the VFR charts, you can still use Skyvector or openflightmaps.org. However, the VFR charts that you see there will not be as detailed as the American VFR sectionals or the official VFR charts of your area. So let's hop on over to skyvector.com and do a little flight planning. For our example, we will do a short round trip from Foxtrot Sierra India Alpha, Seychelles International at Mahe, to Praslin Island, then to Frigate Island, then returning to Mahe. Flight planning is very simple. Just right-click on Foxtrot Sierra India Alpha and click Plan for the airport. Simply do the same thing for Praslin Island. And since there is no airport indicated on Frigate Island, well, there is one in real life, but it's not indicated, I'm just going to right-click on the island of Frigate and then click Plan. But this time I'm going to use the GPS coordinates at the very bottom. Once we completed the flight planning, we will see the route details in that column here. If you want to enter those route details into your Vatsim flight plan, simply copy and paste. However, I probably would type in quadruple Z instead of that GPS position and explain in the remarks section that I intend to fly to the airport on Frigate Island. We also see restricted airspace on this chart. We have two CTRs or control zones, one for Foxtrot Sierra India Alpha and one for Praslin. The CTR ranges from the surface to 2,000 feet, and we need to make sure that we have ATC clearance to exit or enter. Above 2,000 feet there is a circular class Delta airspace that we do not intend to enter. We will fly below 2,000 feet. Notice that the class Delta southwest of Mahe Island starts at 3,500 feet. The outer ring is the controlled airspace that starts at 7,500 feet and goes up to 10,500 feet. Now we'll do a rough fuel calculation with the Bell 206 Jet Ranger. Let's look at the first leg of our flight, Seychelles International to Praslin. First thing I need is the distance. You can see that we need to fly 24 nautical miles to get to Praslin Island. And the second thing I need is the hourly fuel consumption rate of the Jet Ranger, which is about 27 gallons. In order to find out how much fuel I need, I will have to calculate how long it will take me to fly from Mahe to Praslin. We'll depart from our present position, so I don't expect long hover or taxi work. However, before we get to cruise speed, there is going to be a climb phase. For this example, I'll assume a climb rate of 500 feet per minute, so it will take us 3 minutes to get from the surface to an altitude of 1,500 feet. Climb speed will be about 60 knots, so in the 3 minutes of our climb phase, we will fly exactly 3 nautical miles. I'm going to use the same figures for our approach into Praslin, so a descent of 500 feet per minute at a speed of 60 knots, so that gives us another 3 minutes at 3 miles. You could also not factor in the descent phase and simply count it as part of your cruise phase. However, I will do it for this example. So with the departure and approach, we will have covered 6 miles of the 24 miles, which leaves us 18 miles for cruise flight. At max continuous power, I expect the Jet Ranger to fly roughly about 100 knots. Today we have a little tailwind of a few knots, so we might get there a little quicker. I'll disregard this today. However, if we would have a headwind that slows us down, I would definitely factor it in, because the aircraft would actually have a slower ground speed and it would take us a little bit longer to get to Praslin. In 60 minutes we will cover the distance of 100 nautical miles. So how many minutes will it take us to cover the distance of 8 miles? 60 times 18 divided by 100 adds up to 10.8 minutes. Adding the 6 minutes of our departure and approach phase, that gives us a total estimated flight time of 16.8 or 17 minutes. 17 divided by 60 gives us 0.28 hours. Multiplying that with our hourly fuel consumption rate of 27 equals 7.56 gallons of fuel. Since we unfortunately cannot enter the amount of gallons in the X-Plane Fuel and Load Manager, we will have to convert the gallons to pounds. 7.56 gallons of jet fuel, which we would need for the Jet Ranger, roughly amount to 49.9 pounds of fuel. Now let's check our calculation with X-Plane's flight time prediction. 49.9 pounds of fuel roughly lets us fly for 70 minutes and 41 seconds. Close enough. Flying over water, I would choose Seychelles Airport as my alternate as well. I mean, there is an helipad on La Digue Island pretty close to Praslin. However, I figure if the weather turns bad in Praslin, it probably is also bad at La Digue Island. So my alternate would be the Seychelles International, which is simply fly back. So I take double the amount that I just calculated. For unforeseeable events, I add 5% of my trip fuel as contingency fuel. You can basically choose any amount that you like. On top of that, we will add our fuel reserve, which will keep us airborne for 20 minutes. 27 gallons divided by 3 is 9 gallons, or roughly 59.4 pounds of fuel. All that adds up to a total fuel amount of 164.2 pounds of fuel for my trip to Praslin. For the round trip that we have planned earlier, of course, you would have to include the other legs of the flight. So if you like, feel free to calculate the complete amount of fuel that we need for the round trip and let me know in the comments. Finally enough, Skyvector is also a very good tool to plan IFR flights. All you need to do is switch over from the VFR charts to the high or low IFR charts. Here you can use official waypoints as well as IFR routes. You'll find an example of creating an IFR flight plan on Skyvector in my video called IFR Night Flight Part 1. So that concludes our flight planning episode. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something. If you did, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll be seeing you around next time.